Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video, I'd like to discuss a report last week that suggests the Liberal Democrats are planning to make Westminster electoral reform without a referendum the price for a confidence and supply deal for Labour after the next election, assuming all goes well. But not too well for Labour from the Lib Dems' point of view. I'll be discussing the political realities of this potential move as well as what I think Labour should do about it. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So, that the Liberal Democrats and Labour are discussing post-election possibilities for cooperation behind the scenes is nothing new. I was talking about this last year. It is absolutely essential. The electoral reality is that Labour can win enough seats to form a government. Almost certainly not a majority. Obviously, Labour are trying to win a majority, and they will certainly talk publicly about aiming for a majority of seats. But the Labour leadership is these days both pragmatic and willing to work with allies. So, of course, they're discussing potential deals. Oh, not with the SNP, of course. And you may ask, why do this now? Because you don't really know where the balance of power is until you see how many seats each party gets, which is absolutely true. But once the election is over, and if Labour are the largest party but without an effective majority, they don't want to waste a lot of time striking confidence deals and then negotiating each and every piece of legislation that they wish to pass. If Labour form the next government, they want to work quickly to show people the benefits that their vote has produced. When Labour last won power, they were able to announce a whole list of reforms as long as your arm, just 100 days into power. Never mind that the current Conservative government can't name anything over 100 months of power. The next Labour government also have to bowl people over with improvements, because the Tory media will not give them a honeymoon period. They won't say, well, let's see how it goes. They'll be straight in on day one with the attacks. Without a majority, Labour need the votes of opposition MPs to get anything done. That's just maths. So best work out common areas of interest first. And the first job will be a smooth and quick transition of power. That means a confidence deal. They then need to set a budget. That means a supply deal. And this latest, quite short article talks about electoral reform in return for that confidence and supply agreement. Note, there's no talk of coalition. I've said no end of times that when Labour rule out a coalition, they're not just playing a political game, they mean it. It's not really possible. Not because they refuse to form one, but because it's not credible. The coalition between the Tories and the Lib Dems from 2010 had a fairly large majority together. At best, the Labour Party might just about get as many seats as the Tories did in 2010, and that's on the upper end of hope. They're more likely to fall short of it. But the Liberal Democrats, they'll do well to get half of the seats they gained in 2010. They could get more. It's not ridiculous to suggest they'd get more, but not as many as they did back then. So we may be in a situation whereby, let's say Labour get 300 seats, I'd take that, and the Liberal Democrats get 30, again, I'd take that. That means that Labour can form a government with just Lib Dem support, but every vote for legislation will be very squeaky bum time because rebels could cause trouble. So then we come to the issue of whether the Lib Dems really would make an electoral reform without a referendum their price, and if Labour would agree. Now, in one sense, it should be a no-brainer. If the precise nature of the electoral reform is proportional representation, and it wasn't mentioned in the article, then it is powerfully in the interests of both Labour and the Liberal Democrats. And whereas the Lib Dems can publicly get behind the move, it is trickier for Labour. So why is that? Well, a couple of reasons. The first is that there are people in Labour who have the attitude that it's better to be in opposition for years on end and then win absolute power every now and then. Which is a very blinkered attitude at the best of times, but when we're on the road to fascism, actively dangerous. But given the nature of politics right now, there is overwhelming support for proportional representation in the Labour Party membership. And I mean overwhelming. If Starmer adopted it as official policy during this year's conference, it would be incredibly popular. So why doesn't he do it? Well, he might do it. I don't know that he won't. But if he doesn't, it'll be down to the second difficulty for Labour, which is that people often talk about Brexit being the elephant in the room, but there is another for Labour. And many who are either in or support the movement are aware of it and say nothing as well. Starmer is not in the camp of wanting to resist proportional representation. He doesn't want Labour in opposition for years and years in return for a crack at sole power every generation or so. He has talked positively about proportional representation, even as leader. Right now, he is persuaded that it's not a good strategic move. That's all there is to it. You know, I don't know whether the argument of his advisors is based on sound data or not. It could be. All I know is that it is a strategic move. It could be that they have data showing that their key target voters in key target seats would be put off by the move. Remember, it's not a case of what some of those voters think now, but what happens when the Tory media go nuts and throw the kitchen sink into attacking it. Because here's the thing. If Labour get behind it and they put it in their manifesto, which I would support, they will attract the votes of natural Lib Dem and Green supporters in those target seats. And you think to yourself, well, they should do it then. Will that be enough to compensate for the ones they lose who pay too much attention to the Tory media? I don't know. And nor does anyone that doesn't have access to targeted polling. Remember, it doesn't matter what the majority of people think about a particular issue. What matters is the small number of swing voters in marginal constituencies. You do not have to wait very long for an article written by someone arguing for Labour to get behind proportional representation. Andy Burnham's the latest. But the problem with all of these articles, and I mean every single one and every speech and every statement, is what they do is they explain the benefits of adopting proportional representation, either for the country or for Labour or for both. Right? Preaching to the converted. But not a single one of them makes an argument for how Labour can win the election with this policy. Because in opposition, I'll say it time and again, the only thing that matters is what policy will get you elected. In government, whole range of things you need to do. In opposition, get elected. The danger is if Labour think that the policy will cost them the election. Now, I won't thank them for adopting a policy, even what I think is the most important policy of our age, that dumps the Tories back in power. Because do you know what? You don't get that policy then, do you? I already warned in 2019, the price for failure then was too high for the country. Now, I don't know if the country is going to survive even the loss in 2019. I really don't think it can survive another one. The best case scenario is that Labour MPs discipline themselves for once in their lives and focus on this issue. They demand to know on what basis Starmer's advisors are arguing against public backing of PR. And if it's robust, accept it, because the most important thing is winning power. But if it isn't, then demand that the party takes a more strategic position based on solid data, not the prejudice of someone who generally talks sense but is prone to bouts of irrationality. Because this is the thing, I do not know on which the current party position is based. It may be genuinely based on sound judgment, but it may not. And that is their job this summer. If PR is the way to go as a manifesto promise, the best time to announce it would be at conference. Now, it doesn't have to be this year's conference, but I still take the view every conference could be the last one before the general election. You know, the party are going to vote in favour of it this year. There's going to be a motion at conference this year. Last year there was as well, and it was backed by almost all the member delegates. It was the unions that sunk it. Now, several of those same unions have had their members vote to formally back the move. So there'll be nothing to stop it this year. That's all there is to it. So if Starmer makes a speech after the vote saying, yeah, we're going to adopt it as official Labour policy, that would be immense. But he can only do that if the leadership is satisfied that it's definitely the right move strategically. Not in the best interest of the country, never mind policies in the best interest of the country if you can't implement them. Because if they don't, it doesn't mean it won't be in the manifesto. Note that it hasn't been ruled out. This isn't like entry to the single market. It hasn't been ruled out. It just means they're not sure. And if they're not sure, you don't adopt it until they are. So then what if Labour don't consider it a safe bet? Let's say even getting into the general election, they have to write the manifesto. They're still convinced it's a net vote loser, right? What if it doesn't go in the manifesto? Well, you can't then implement it without a referendum. It would be outrageous to change the electoral system without such a promise. It doesn't have to be a detailed promise, though. Bear in mind, the Conservatives have changed the electoral system of mayoral contests with just a vague manifesto line. They didn't specifically say they were going to do that. They just said they were going to support first past the post. So now they've changed the way the Mayor of London election works to first past the post. They could say, well, we promised it in the manifesto. It wasn't very clear, was it? Well, Labour can do the same, can't they? But to get electoral reform passed without a referendum, there would need to be a manifesto promise that Labour could point to, even if it's a bit vague, in order to get it through the House of Lords without trouble. Now, I can see this happening. In fact, because you see so many people arguing for Labour to adopt PR, but not a single one of them wanting to tackle the issue of electability with the policy, I can see the situation whereby Labour adopts the policy late on, not this year, late on, and in as vague a form as they can get away with, while still being able to get it in the manifesto. I have some confidence here. I just think that there's going to be a lot of aggro from people when Labour don't adopt the position clearly and quickly this year. It would be brilliant if they did. But like I say, if Labour MPs would like to demand access to the evidence on which the current policy of, let's think about it later, is based, then that may speed things up if it turns out the evidence base is a load of rubbish. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.